Hello, everyone. I hope you're just coming into the session. I just want to give it literally just 1 minute before everybody is in. So please bear with me. We're just going to give it a minute just to allow everybody to come in. So thank you for your patience. Right, for those of you just joining it, we're just giving it a minute to let other people just come in and we will start. Right. I think it's been just over a minute, and we have a lot to cover. So let's press on. So first of all, thank you very much for taking the time to attend this session, and I will tell you a little bit more about what the session is about. But before we go in, I just wanted to spend a few seconds, if you don't know much about ROCCO, and it's just one quick slider to let you know what we do, what ROCCO is all about. So, I mean, if you in this graphic, I won't bore you with everything that is on there, but just if you look at the orange circle, that's the beginnings of ROCCO. In fact, this week we are celebrating the 11th anniversary of ROCCO. So it's been 11 years ago when ROCCO started. We basically started with the research side of things. As you're probably aware, for the last 11 years, we've been doing a lot of research into the market. We benchmark all the vendors, look at what are the different challenges and opportunities that MNOs face, and indeed what vendors also face. So that's the foundation where ROCCO started 11 years back. And since then, we've added other arms. You know, the research side has to be, especially the research we do in the public space, has to be fully independent. It cannot be influenced by any of our clients because it is 100% totally independent research. So we never do any sponsored research. All the research is independent, done by us, and there are no, the only revenue model we have for research is that people buy our research reports. Nobody can influence it or ask us to do a piece of research for them. We do those things, but that is not for public consumption, and that's done specifically for our clients as part of our strategy work that we do, where we help our clients understand the market better, help them with the marketing side of things, help them with strategy, help them with operations. So it's a vast array of projects that we do in anything in interconnect, roaming, and messaging, basically to helping our clients to get better at their business, to be more successful. Because we have 11 years of this massive data, it's really helpful to kind of help our clients. We are the best placed consultancy company for roaming and interconnect. We don't believe anybody's got the kind of expertise and knowledge that we do have. And based on this, what we realized a few years ago is that roaming, there's so much changing in roaming, and it's so difficult for people to get access to good training because the expertise generally tend to be in Western Europe or the US, and for either people to come into these places or people from these places to go to different parts of the world tends to be quite expensive. And hence, by the time people just book their flight tickets or their hotels, their training budgets are blown. So we created ROCCO U, which I personally like to call the Netflix of roaming training. And it's a platform where you can take any roaming course, and it's done by experts in the industry. You have the best material available to you all the time, and it's something that stays with you. You take a roaming course online, and it stays with you for a year. And sometimes you forget what was that concept all about. You can always go back and listen to the training again, and always keep yourself updated. Anyway, we've got lots to run through. Please do get in touch with us if you have any questions about what ROCCO does. We'll be more than happy to schedule a call and walk you through what ROCCO does. Today is more about roaming challenges. So what we've done is, this is not a course per se, but we've taken some bits from our courses to try and show you what are the challenges that we see coming up in roaming. If you don't know me, my name is Dheeraj Uzair. I'm the CEO of ROCCO Strategy, which is the strategy arm of ROCCO. We also have Jason Bryan, who runs the consulting arm. He's the founder of ROCCO. and he is the CEO of ROCCO Consulting, ROCCO Research, and basically leads on the research activities that we do in ROCCO. I have over 20 years of experience in the industry, having worked with various MNOs. But again, I won't bore you with all that. Everything is written down, and you can look me up in LinkedIn as well if you want to know more about me. But coming down to the point, what is the purpose of this module? Really, it's about you. What we have been seeing over the last few years is really that the sands from beneath our feet are shifting. What we thought was very, very stable, we knew where we were going. As an industry, that is not there anymore. It is not as stable as we think. It's almost an illusion, because over the last 20 years or so, we've so gotten used to how roaming works and how these things function and how they progress, that it's created this illusion that everything is going to progress exactly the same. And actually, the industry really needs you. It needs all the people to get that expertise, to understand what's going on, so we can drive the industry forward. So this is a little bit of a wake-up call to kind of shake everybody up. Hey, listen, this is not the same anymore. Things have changed, and things are changing even faster. And we need to really look at how we're going to be doing things differently. So hopefully, this module raises these questions in your mind at the end of it, and you come face to face with the challenges that we have. Every ROCCO U module, we've got this tradition. We start with a question which is slightly related to the topic, not exactly, and we give the answer at the end of the course. So the question for this session is really, what is so special about Rolls-Royce? That's widely considered the best car in the world, but what is so special about it? And obviously, please don't bother to Google it. We will have the answer at the end of the session. Right, so if you're a big fan of the American cartoon The Simpsons, there is one episode where Bart Simpson comes in and tells his dad, "Dad, there's a crisatunity." And it's obviously an invented word, but what it actually means, what he's trying to say is there's both a crisis and an opportunity. And that's exactly where we are in our industry, in roaming and interconnect right now, and messaging. We won't be able to cover all of it, so I've just picked up a few things that we might be able to cover. Even here, what you see here, 5G, new tech, eSIM, new players coming into the market. We won't be able to deal with all of it in this session, because it's a relatively short session. So we'll just take a few elements, but hopefully it gives you a flavor of what you need to get ready for. But as is always the case, if you want to look into the future, what's coming in the future, you really have to understand the past. What's happened in the past? If we understand our history, we can kind of then extrapolate that and understand what's going to happen in the future. But in this case, is that even true? I don't know. Let's find out. So what is our history? Where did we come from? It all started with first generation networks. Obviously, when that came, they weren't called first generation networks. They were just a mobile network. And the first one was actually in Japan. In 1979 by NTT Docomo is when the first mobile network was launched. It was based on an analog technology. And by actually 1984, they had covered entire Japan, and everybody had access to mobile telephony for the first time. And then came the second generation networks. This is where most of us and people on the call here will understand the mobile telephony, because this is the GSMA or the GSM networks which are coming into force. And the first one was in 1991. This was launched in Finland, and that's when, after a year or so, the roaming started. In fact, just last year, we celebrated the 30th year anniversary of roaming. So it was the second generation networks were kind of slightly advanced version. You could have calls with much better quality. You could encrypt them. Security started coming into the picture. So it was still basically the same thing, but much better. However, there was a seed also which started to be learned, not in 2G, but in 2.5G, when people started to realize, you know what, internet is actually a thing. There is something happening with this, and there's no reason why we should not have that access to on the phones. So we started at that time known as 2.5G or GPRS, if you remember. These days, if by any chance on your handsets you see the letter E, which says Edge, which is an advanced version of GPRS, or in some countries you might even see GPRS, because you're still latched onto a 2G network, you almost get a shiver because it's like, oh my God, I'm on the GPRS network. It's horrible. But that's where the fundamentals were starting to get laid for what we have today. With GPRS, obviously with 2.5G came the realization that, hey, data is really a thing. People want to have access to it. And based on whatever technology was available, the first, third generation networks came into being. And this was basically, trying to shift the focus a little bit from just voice to make data more accessible. And again, it wasn't quite there, right? We had to wait really for 4G when we really started to see the speeds where we don't have to wait for that circle of death going round and round till all the data is downloaded. And that's when the 4G, the fourth generation networks came in, but there was a big shift from 3G to 4G, which in terms of the 4G networks became all IP, right? Everything was IP. And now even 4G seems to be old-fashioned, apart from VoLTE, obviously, where we're still fighting this battle about how to get VoLTE, throughout VoLTE roaming throughout the world. But it's old-fashioned because everybody's already talking about 5G, and these are the two bits: the 4G roaming, specifically VoLTE, and 5G roaming. We will take a bigger look, or a better look, a deeper look into what this actually means for us. The two messages that I want us to pick from this, the history is: one, we slowly but surely progressed. If you see first generation, second generation, even 3G was kind of just the beginning of data, but it was still all about voice. Obviously, from 3G onwards, our industry's completely shifted, and suddenly the story is all about data. It's all IP and data networks taking place. So voice, we hardly even talk about that. If you are in a roaming negotiator and you do roaming negotiations, till a few years back, everybody was talking about voice and SMS. Then SMS started to become a little less relevant, and it was voice and data. And now, the most important thing people really talk about and have discussions on is data. The other lesson here, for what we learn from history, is not only that voice is now moving towards the data side of things. We all know that. But the second also is the fact that as these networks have evolved, previously for roaming, it was a simple, step forward. All the networks were dealing with 2G. Then everybody said, hey, 2.5G is here. Let's all move to 2.5G. And everybody started to do GPRS launches. Then came 3G. Everybody started to do 3G launches. Then came 4G, and everybody said, yeah, we have to move to 4G networks. Until then, it was straight, fair enough. Everybody was doing the exact same thing. And for the first time, when VoLTE came, most people, rather than saying, yeah, let's do VoLTE, went, what's the point? We don't need to do VoLTE. And that's the time when other things had also started to happen. Now we are in a position that, people have realized why VoLTE is so important, why they must do it. But at the same time, there are other things which are happening, right? There's M2M traffic has grown, but it's not really there. The promise is not being shown. 5G is already here, not only NSA, but SA. There are all these satellite operators, private networks coming into place. There's a new billing system, BCE, coming in. Networks all over the place are decommissioning. And there is total chaos in the industry. Where do you focus? It's no longer the same stepwise progression that we had, that everybody did the same thing. Suddenly, there's chaos. And this is where we're finding out that the sands beneath our feet are shifting. But what's different? Why is it so different? What happens with VoLTE that is creating this little bit of chaos? Obviously, there are two main things that are different about VoLTE. One, that it's all data. There's no, even voice is now megabytes, and you count it in megabytes. And even, actually now when you do negotiations, you're probably negotiating rates for gigabits rather than megabits. And also the fact that VoLTE is home rooted. The calls don't work exactly how they used to. So previously, when you were doing different launches, the basic platform, the basic fundamentals underneath it were exactly the same. And it's for the first time when VoLTE's come along that we are noticing, oh my God, it actually shifts everything. It's not just another G or another generation, but there's a fundamental change in how we have to do VoLTE roaming. And it has various impacts on us, which we're kind of dealing with, but not really well. You know, in home routing, it complicates the commercial side of things. You know, now the visited network at the VPMN is no longer, doesn't have to bear the costs of interconnect. You know, when a visited customer, when he was roaming, when he made a call in the country, the call left the network and went to the B party or wherever the call was going. But now, and the visited network had to pay all these costs, the interconnection costs to route the call, and had to deal with the carriers, make sure the call goes, the quality was in their control, right? Now, all that is gone because the call is just routed back home using S8HR on the IPX. So the whole fundamental of the cost basis of how a VPMN used to charge has completely shifted, has changed, which means when you're negotiating these prices for VoLTE, there's a fundamental shift in the cost basis itself, which people are not really dealing with well. Again, the other difference is it's charged as data, right? So you're having to charge data on the wholesale level, charging voice as data per megabyte. And settling for it, VoLTE call is very different. So if you have roaming with a network and you have launched VoLTE with them, some of the calls will be going on, normal 3G, 2G network will be circuit switch call where you will be charged per minute pricing as previously, and some will be on VoLTE where you are going to be charging per megabyte prices. How do you map the two together? How do you make sure the pricing is exactly the same? It's extremely complicated to do that. We'll dig a bit deeper and come into this because right now, the industry is not dealing with this really well. We've started with very, very basic level things, just trying to make it work. But when it actually comes to why your business has hired you to make money for the business, we're actually not dealing with that really well. What is also happening is VoLTE has now really put voice revenues completely under threat. So as calls are going over IPX, there's no termination revenue anymore with these calls. So for the voice carriers, it's a bigger threat because most of the traffic, the international traffic, is beginning to disappear. You know, when the OTT platforms like WhatsApp and Viber and Telegram, all these came, it took away a lot of, traffic away from international calls and international carriers. But they still had the roaming traffic, the traditional roaming traffic was still being carried by them. But with VoLTE roaming, even that is starting to disappear. With VoLTE roaming, as networks, you know, we all know that when a customer goes roaming, 80% of the calls are actually back home. And that meant the home network, every time the call was coming back home, would also get a mobile termination charge for it. So there was a little bit of revenue associated with that as well. Now that is gone. All you are left with is IPX costs because you're still having to pay for this data. So for operators, there are fundamental shifts happening with VoLTE, and we're still currently just dealing with the technical side of things. The commercial side of things, we haven't even kind of dealt with that properly, and we'll come to that a little bit more. And this is not the end of the story. This has just started because decommissioning so far, okay, most networks have either, or many networks have announced they're decommissioning either 2G or 3G. It's only in the US, really started with the AT&T where they've taken both 2G and 3G networks out, and they only have a 4G and a 5G network now. So you don't have an option but to launch VoLTE. Obviously, there's also Verizon and there's T-Mobile. Verizon has always been a 4G only network. I mean, they had CDMA, but then it's for GSM networks. The only way to roam with Verizon is through doing a VoLTE launch. And obviously the same is with T-Mobile also. They have really taken out their 2G, 3G networks now. So there might be some elements left, but you cannot really rely on a 2G or a 3G network in the US anymore. But what is going to happen now, starting actually beginning next year, 2024, 2025, 2026, we'll see a whole lot of networks in Europe, in Latin America, Far East Asia, Asia also coming out. And that means an immense amount of pressure on operators to launch VoLTE roaming with multiple networks in multiple countries at the same time. So what we're looking at is, for the first time ever, what has taken us 25 years to build our footprint that we can offer our customers, that you can go roam in 220 countries, we will start to diminish. We'll start to see that diminish. You'll actually have to withdraw some networks where your customers may not be able to roam because you just haven't had the time to launch VoLTE. I talked about commercials, that it's complicated. There are three different ways to launch or to charge for VoLTE. You can charge for VoLTE as data, which is exactly the same that you are charging for browsing or other data roaming. Or you can have a differential charge where voice is charged differently from normal data, and that is based on the APN. Or you can have an even more complex structure, which is QCI, where you're actually monetizing quality. This is for the first time. It gives us the option to now, we've had options previously, but we've never really taken them. But this is the first time where if you charge by QCI, you're charging per quality, a premium quality, you can charge higher. This is really what operators have needed to not make voice a commodity, but make premium and charge for the premium of the voice calls. But it's not only about implementation. You can implement this, which is complex, but then how do you negotiate all that? Imagine sitting down with a roaming partner and then negotiating rates based on QCI values, based on quality, and the amount of time that you would have. Right now, everybody's got this simple standard template, and you negotiate prices, you come down a little bit, and you move ahead. Sure, you've got to do 150 discount negotiations probably. And this has to happen every year. So right now, what most operators are doing are let's just charge by data. But there's a big revenue loss in this case. In fact, if you're a net inbounder, if you receive more roaming, then you send out, you're actually getting a massive revenue loss, because if you're charging just per data, in 1 megabyte, you can get many, many minutes done. So you have a multiple thing. And if you want to understand, we obviously have a full course on VoLTE. Please do take that course, and it completely details this out and tells you what the pitfalls are and how you should be dealing with these things. But the idea here is that so much has changed, and we're not really dealing with that really well right now. Of course, there are other challenges which still remain. So we've got, lawful intercept, which is extremely complex, and some networks in the world haven't even been able to launch VoLTE because they're regulators, and they're, the lawful, whoever decides how it should be, generally it tends to be the regulator, but also the security agencies in that country have set such strict rules that you just can't provide LI as the same. And the reason for this is because S8HR obviously is home routed. Your calls are home routed, and the visited network is not service aware. They don't know if it's just data or if it's a call. So it's very difficult to provide lawful intercept to their kind of different agencies, security agencies at home. Not all handsets behave the same. Initially when VoLTE roaming started, for the first time ever, how backward we had become is that people had to actually send handsets for testing because the visitor network handsets wouldn't work. It was not just SIMs. Here we are talking about virtualizing everything, and everything should be virtual, and even sending SIM cards in a post seems so last century. But here we'd moved to a position where we had to actually even send handsets, not only SIM cards, which makes things really, really difficult. How do you test? And as each handset behaves differently, it's a really complex thing that even if you've tested, all you know is it works on this handset. How do you know if it works on another OEM device? Or even for the same OEM, depending on the software they have on it, it would behave differently. And there still isn't a really good solution for visited country shortcodes. How when you go abroad and you want to order a cab and you see the shortcode of the cab is, say, 4589 or whatever. Previously, you could just dial 4589 and you could order a cab. But now, because the calls are home routed, this 4589 goes into the home network, and the home network has no idea what you're trying to do. Well, it may connect you. If 4589 is a shortcode in the home network, it may connect you there, but it's not going to connect you to the cab company. So you end up paying for something which you didn't want to go to as well. And we are, to a certain degree, of course, the operators who have to deal with LI. are moving along and doing this. Many launches have happened. Basically, most operators, what they have done, they've had to turn encryption off, and that's how people have been able to launch VoLTE. Again, in the course, we go into a lot of detail about how this works and what you need to do. But many operators are also facing this difficulty in they don't want to turn encryption on, or they cannot turn encryption off, and this is creating many issues. So these challenges remain. And remember, on the other side, you cannot run away from these challenges because everything in the next year or so is getting decommissioned. Most of your important networks will not have a VoLTE roaming, or you won't be able to roam on to them without VoLTE roaming. Of course, there are some other solutions like IMS hosted core solutions, which some of the providers have come up, but there are, there can be short-term solutions, but there are implications of that as well. And when do you use them? How do you launch VoLTE? It's just the beginning of this challenge, the first challenge that we are facing. Of course, with VoLTE, there are also opportunities that brings. Remember, we said it's a crisis-unity, so there's an opportunity angle as well. With voice becoming all data and coming into the IPX, suddenly now, as a home network, you can be totally in control of the quality and the experience that you provide your customer, because you have a choice now which carriers that you use to make sure your calls are great quality calls. And like we said, 80% of the calls generally tend to be back home. So in that instance, when the call is routed on the IPX back home, operators, 80% of the calls, out of those 80%, many calls, depending on how big the subscriber base is, could be on your own network. So it doesn't even need to leave the network. And generally speaking, the interconnects between domestic networks are quite good, are quite strong. So you can, and obviously VoLTE gives you HD quality calls because you use a codec, which is high quality codec. So you can then in roaming really finally give your customers that kind of experience that they pretty much have at home, which is HD calls, really clear calls. So there's an opportunity there that you can increase roaming and control the experience your customers have on that. Again, because it's home rooted, fraud can really be tackled really well, because every call is coming into your network, and you as a home network can decide which call you want to go through. You can have your own fraud systems control this and analyze which calls you should go through. There is obviously another angle to fraud here as well, because you're, as an MNO, everybody really understands their country well, and they know which are premium rate numbers, for example, where they want to route calls. But now, if somebody is dialing a premium rate numbers in an international country, how do you know that this is a premium rate number? Or how do you know this is not, this is a fraudulent call? And, to deal with that can create more challenges. But there are ways to kind of also deal with that, obviously not in scope of this module here, but there is also this opportunity. It gives you more control and can help you lessen fraud. We talked about cost reduction, how the whole, the interconnect side of things changes from the visited operator. They don't have to deal with the cost of, routing the call anymore on the interconnect side of things, paying the interconnect charge, the mobile terminating fee. All that bit is gone. It just comes on an IPX back to the home network. So the VPMN costs are lower. That means the HPMN should be able to negotiate lower prices for it. We haven't even come to that yet, because actually right now most operators are saying, let's charge each other just by data, just to keep it simple. So we haven't even reached that level of complexity yet, but there is certainly that opportunity for operators to be able to do that. And as VPMN's costs go down, so do HPMN's costs are going down, and which means that they can pass this on to their customers. There's a question from Allah. I will try and get to this at the end of the course if you're okay. But there, let me just, since you've asked it, let me just get to it now. Alon's asking, hi all, but is there also revenue reduction due to VoLTE roaming? Yes, on the wholesale side, if you are a visited network as a VPMN, and if you're charging your the HPMN, what the price that you've negotiated is the same as data, you haven't differentiated, you're not charging a separate rate for VoLTE, then actually you have a massive revenue loss, because in 1 megabyte of data you can fit in many more minutes. I think I can't remember from the top of my head, but I think it's 30 times less that you will be making. So it's a massive loss. The only way you can make up for the loss is, in the sense right now, is if you are if your traffic is balanced with the visited operator, so both of you, or with the HPMN and you're the VPMN, and you're pretty much sending similar amounts of traffic to each other, so both of you have a similar loss and have come down to a similar price, then it's okay. But if, for example, you are a net inbounder traffic and you're doing this, you will have a massive revenue loss. Again, I encourage everybody on the call to take the VoLTE roaming course, because it explains all this out in much more detail. I hope that's okay, Alam. If not, please do get in touch with me later on. I'll be more than happy to explain further. Right, on the quality monetization as well, like we said, there's an opportunity to monetize quality as we move to QCI. And this is really, and we'll look at this a bit more in the 5G section, about what is different about 5G and why that is a challenge and what do we need to do about that. But it's been this dream of operators for a long time, and a fear also that we can't let telecom become a commodity, and we need to start charging for the quality, the premium quality. And we've been wanting to do that. We've never been able to do that. But actually with VoLTE in roaming, that provides us this opportunity to be able to do that. Right, so these are just initially today the stuff that we're dealing with VoLTE, the biggest challenges we have, which, although many launches are happening, we haven't really gotten our heads around that. And then comes 5G, right? It's not, VoLTE is not enough. 5G is there sitting on our heads. We have to launch 5G. But before we get into what the problems are with 5G, I really want to deal with this issue about how 5G is different, or why 5G, because every time I'm talking to our clients or different people, there seems to be missing this insight or this real understanding of what 5G is and why is it different from 4G. It's not just a faster 4G network, so to say. So, you know, when I was growing up, the one thing my mother taught me is, you know, you can never make everybody happy. You cannot make all the people happy all the time. And to take this example, this is exactly what 5G actually is trying to do. And I'll explain this slightly better. So, you know, when it comes to people, you know, we understand these really well. We understand phones, and pretty much how much ever different we are, people use their phones in pretty much a similar way. They do a certain amount of browsing, will send a certain amount of data, make some video calls, have mostly calls and text messages and stuff. So we've kind of, as operators, figured this bit out. But when you start to look at things, which is IoT, Internet of Things, things are very different. And we don't really, I mean, to a certain degree, we understand that. But just to look at the extremes, a smart meter, which is deployed at home, which is sending, say, a water meter reading at the end of the month, uses maybe a kilobyte of data in a month, which is very different from, say, a CCTV network, which in a high security area is deploying and sending 8K images, or, you know, somebody's broadcasting the Olympics or such event and using a 5G network, massive data, high quality, high throughput, low latency required. It's very different, right? But you have one network. How can you have a network which is catered to this 1 kilobit and also this massive data speed? And that's where 5G comes in, because, you know, to do these things, it's an extremely expensive exercise for networks to do that, to be all things to all people. And what 5G does is basically be able to do this by using one network. Otherwise, what you would have to do is create multiple different networks for each of these use cases, which obviously would be very expensive. And that's where 5G tries to do that. And it's not really, for us, what we see is actually not what we get. What we see is this picture on the left with this lady recording something at an event, like a video. That's not really 5G, but that's just the hype. What 5G is really about is IoT, is the pictures that you see on the right-hand side, is the CCTV cameras, is the shipping containers, it's the connected car, it's the smart meters. And that's what 5G has been created to do. Of course, it gives us great speeds, but that's not what really 5G is really about. And actually, even in 5G, there are two different types of 5G, right? There is really 5G NSA, which is really 4G plus. It's just using the RAN or the new radio, which 5G provides, but the core is still a 4G core. 5G SA is really where 5G comes into being, and that's when we will really start to be challenged. I mean, many networks have already launched 5G roaming, you'll hear, but all of them have launched 5G NSA. We still don't have, I mean, there have been trials, there have been announcements, yes, but live commercial traffic traveling every day still really hasn't picked up on 5G SA. 5G NSA, yes. In fact, 5G NSA is so easy. Most people are doing it like they did 3G launches. It's by default. You don't even need to test. You need to just check a few things. ENDC codes are correct. And again, we have a 5G course on this, which gives you much more information. So I won't go deeper into this. But the challenge coming is about dealing with VoLTE, and on top of that, you have this big monster of 5G just sitting. And with 5G also, there are changes. They have tried to bring security quite seriously now. And within the 3GPP standards, there is a new entity called the SEP, which they have introduced. And basically, the two networks will have to work with each other just using a SEP. So there's a SEP in between, and a SEP, as you can see here, stands for a Security Edge Protection Proxy, and all the data and everything needs to go through the SEP. And it's not that straightforward either. All the 3GPP has said you must use SEP for a 5G for 5G roaming, and you must. There's no 5G roaming without SEP. There are two ways of actually doing it. You could have SEP deployed based on something called Prince, which is protocol for N32 interconnect security, or you can have it based on TLS, which stands for transport layer security. And these two are quite different, and they have massive impacts for the industry as well. And that's why actually even some of the bodies like the GSMA have been discussing this for the last 2 years about, should we go for Prince or should we go to TLS? What is better? Which way should we go? So this is what a 5G network looks like, right? And as you can see, you can't see your well-known terms like HLR or VLR or MSC, all these things anyway. It's a completely different network. Again, unfortunately, don't have time to go into this, but it kind of gives you the flavor of how different it is. Please do look up our 5G roaming course, and all the details are provided, and all this is explained really well. But the reason this slide is there to kind of show you how data, you have a visited network set and a hosted network set, kind of here, if I can draw this really, really badly, this is the where all the traffic has to go through the set. And also, I wanted to give you just an indication of how different a 5G network looks from like a 2G, 3G network that we are used to. So depending on what kind of SEP is deployed will have an impact on the way roaming works and which bits of it you are outsourcing. So for example, in TLS, it's an end-to-end encryption, and in between nobody can have a look. That means if you have an IPX in between, they can't provide any value-added services. Or you have the Prince, where only part of the signaling is encrypted to enabling roaming VAS. So there is obviously a give and take here, and there's a lot of discussion still ongoing for the last 2 years. What is better for the industry? Which way should we go? And what is it that we learned last time? We had the similar discussion going on for years, was with VoLTE, when for on and on and on, we went on discussing, should we go for S8HR home routing or LBO? And it took us years. By the time we had decommissioning sitting on our heads, and it was literally too late. Like I said, every operator will lose a certain amount of revenue or footprint because it took us so long to realize how we're going to do that. With 5G, we still seem to have some time, but we need to resolve this fairly quickly. And each operator needs to understand this. The roaming teams need to understand this and what impact it will have on them. We talked about, I mentioned this a little bit, for a long time, especially in the early 2000s, MNOs started to verbalize this fear of theirs that, are we just a dumb pipe? Will we just end up becoming a dumb pipe and other people use us? Which is what is happening. In fact, today, if you're aware, many of the European CEOs have issued a statement asking the European Commission that the other data providers, the content providers, should contribute to setting up the price of the networks that they're building. So we're the ones, the MNOs, who are building all these networks, and it is the Netflixes, the Facebooks, the Twitters, or I should say X, all these people who are really making the money. So these CEOs are reaching out to EU and saying, you need to do something about this because we need to be paid. We're doing all the work, and those guys are the ones who are making the money. And we have just become a commodity. So this fear has been there for a long time and has been coming true. And that's why 5G is different. We saw the slide previously, is we finally have a chance with 5G not to be just a commodity, but create more kind of tailored solution, create a network so if somebody just has a smart meter, you don't have to give them the low latency, high throughput network that the top end of 5G that requires. You can just create a slice. I've used the word slice without explaining what it is, but we'll look at that in a sense. But you can give them a small part of the network, which is just for that, isn't very expensive, and uses little bandwidth. And on the other hand, you can do this for the high utilization where that is. You can give them a much bigger piece of the network. So the need is this actually. The need is to have multiple diverse networks for different use cases. And that is where what we can finally do is, instead of commodity and here, throw a network at them. Here's the network, use it how you can. It's a commodity. No, what we can now do with 5G is say, give you these different flavors. It's not vanilla anymore. You can have different flavors depending on exactly what you need and pay for it accordingly. So we get to actually finally charge based on quality. We're not a dumb pipe anymore. That, at least, is the promise. How do we do that? That is how we do by creating network slicing. And a network slice is basically this. I mean, again, it's not in the scope. We don't have enough time to explain this correctly, but we have a whole module in the 5G roaming course, which covers slicing really, really well and talks you through how slices can be created, what the different types are, the impacts on roaming. But for today, it's enough to know that what you can do is you can create different slice types for different types of use cases, and these are then deployed. And that is where the promise is. That's where, all the networks who have spent billions of dollars on spectrum and on basically the kit for 5G are hoping that this picks up. That means it's coming to us. It's coming to roaming. You cannot say no to it. Can you imagine now moving towards an area where you're not negotiating voice and text and data, but you're negotiating slices and slices of different types and different colors and flavors? How complicated this is going to be. So again, I won't spend too much time on this slide, but really, it changes everything. You can have different slice types, and this will need to be integrated with your, how you are going to bill for it. There's no more tap. We're going to be moving to BCE. The next few slides, we'll look at a little bit of BCE. I'm conscious we're kind of running over time pretty soon. So we'll try and cover it as much as we can. Testing for 5G is going to be extremely complex. It's not a straightforward test, especially if you have to test for different slices with different operators. They may have different slice types you might need to support, or your enterprises will come to you. I have, for example, just to give you a quick example, you win a contract with BMW to supply their cars and connect their cars. So all the BMW cars have your SIM in it. And these BMW cars go everywhere in the world, and they need a specific slice type. And that means you now have to negotiate with your roaming partner to be able to guarantee the quality that you have given to BMW, which your sales team have negotiated. They're not going to be just happy with it in your country. You have to guarantee it. That means signing SLAs with your roaming partners, guaranteeing them for the enterprises. And this is a big change, which, within our industry previously, the GSMA came up with SLAs, but never got used because there was no real use case. There was no demand for it. But with 5G, with slicing, it actually changes everything because there is customer demand. You will have to do it because if you want to go for, make sure you're not a commodity anymore, you want to charge a premium for pricing, that's the cost. That's what you have to provide, right? In 5G, actually, the network comes with their own steering tool included in it. How does that work in association with your current steering tools that you're doing for 4G, 3G, or 2G networks that you have associated? And how complex it is, and you've got to get these two working together. So all these things really are going to make 5G extreme, and this is just a very, very top level, right? We've talked about SEP, we've talked about all these things. Everything. When TAP, for example, disappears, everything is in BCE. Right now, you're 100% dependent. Pretty much most operators are on getting the data for your reporting from your data clearinghouse. And if you're not putting all the data in your data clearinghouse, where do you get your reporting from? So all these things are actually with VoLTE and with 5G, and especially when SA roaming comes in, it is fundamentally shifting where we stand today. And like I started at the beginning of this session, it's moving the sands from under our feet. We don't have a place to stand on very soon, and we could all crash if we don't start dealing with these things head on and understanding them and working together to figure these out, right? There's a PCE I talked about. It's an alternate billing and settlement solution. Why do we need a billing and settlement solution? Because we saw, now with IoT, there are it's not just people, and this has been a case for a while, but it hasn't really picked up because we haven't been able to support it really like we've been previously. Like we've been able to support phones, we haven't been able to support IoT. The difference here is if you have, like I said, a smart meter which uses less than a kilobit of data in a month, and on the other hand, you have these CCTV cameras which are using massive amounts of data, or you have a broadcasting corporation like BBC or CNN or somebody who are using their systems to broadcast pictures, like the coronation pictures that happened in the UK recently. They use a 5G network part of that was sent on the 5G network to the rest of the world, which has huge throughput. How do you deal with that? And it's like, you cannot have, it's like measuring a coronavirus using the same units that you measure galaxies or the distances between galaxies. Obviously, one is in light years or parsecs if you're more into science fiction, and the other is in kind of nanometers. It's tiny, tiny, tiny. You can't have distance between galaxies defined in nanometers, or you can't have the size of a coronavirus in light years. But that's what TAP does, right? Today we have to have everything per megabyte, per minute, but we need different charging models for different prices, and TAP is quite stringent, doesn't allow, and that's why they thought we should have BCE. Typically what BCE does really is makes counting easier. In one word, what it does is aggregation. You don't have to report on every grain that is there in the field, to use this analogy, to your roaming partner. So every minute, you just aggregate everything, and you say, instead of saying, this device on this date at this time used 1 kilobit of data, this device on this time, this date used half a kilobit of data. You don't do that anymore. You just say, in this month, this much data was used. So everything is aggregated. And if you're asking, but this functionality existed in TAP, we could have had data aggregation in TAP. Why do BCE then? It's a very big question, and I think you might want to take the course to understand why and understand the history of BitMet, because we definitely don't have the time to go into this question here. But really, that is what BCE is about. And again, the industry right now is struggling. We have to move to these new models. We have to be able to do this, but we're not really doing it. There isn't that clarity. How do we do this? How do we move forward? How do we adopt BCE? Also is a big challenge. And if we don't do that, what happens to 5G? What happens to 5G roaming? Will these new use cases not happen then? But like we mentioned with 5G, there are also opportunities. We talked about slicing. And I'm going to rush through a little bit because I think we only have about 9 minutes left. Pricing models with BCE will allow us to do all these magnificent things which TAP wouldn't allow previously. We can move to, in fact, a much simpler model in commercially with all-you-can-eat models as well. You can negotiate just pricing for a slice and then you don't have to worry about it. Then again, LBO starts to come in again. You will have, not necessarily for voice, but you may have other opportunities or other use cases which actually require such latency that you need data to be locally broken out and everything routed back home won't be possible. So this could enable new applications and hence increased revenue. So again, crisis and an opportunity, but we have to be ready for it. And right now, whoever I talk to, generally, people aren't really ready for it. M2M roaming, we've been talking about this for so long and it hasn't picked up. Why hasn't it really been picking up? Because of some of these issues. We still haven't understood what permanent roaming is. Operators still have discussions going on and on and on what permanent roaming is. How do you even define M2M? What is M2M and what is not M2M? And what are the commercial models that you need? I mean, IO, in fact, I should say, has been doing some great work on this stuff and has created a guidance document for operators and their members to kind of set the scene and help them work better, and continues to work really hard on this. But the industry needs to get behind this. And if this is not enough of all this I have said, you don't think it's enough of a challenge, we have completely new players in the marketplace. The dominance or the monopoly that mobile network operators had is gone. Now you have satellite operators. You have LEO, low Earth orbit satellites roaming around offering connectivity across the globe. You have new entities of private networks and neutral hosts coming up. It took us, 35 years, and we have about 800 operators in the world, MNOs in the world. Just in last year, there have been about 1,200 different private networks which have been deployed in just 1 year. So you can imagine, and this is just the beginning, the starting of, but again, unfortunately, we're not in a position here to define this better and tell you what a private network or neutral hosts are, but these are new new networks which are being deployed across. They're not MNOs. There's an opportunity for MNOs to shape this, to work with this, to deploy them, but they can also have a massive impact on the risk side as well. So again, I mean, there are other things we don't have, eSIMs and other things that are happening. We don't have the chance. We don't have enough time to talk about this. But these challenges need to be met. But coming back to the question, so what's so special about Rolls-Royce? And you'll understand why I'm talking about this, why this question was here. Well, the big difference between Rolls-Royce and other cars are, obviously, other cars can pretty much buy and procure the same things from the same different manufacturers, because a car manufacturer doesn't make everything, right? Maybe 95% of the stuff that goes into the car is sourced from a different company. From a spark plug to the door or the mirror, the glass could be done by somebody else. But what Rolls-Royce does, which is different, and that's why it is such an iconic car, is that everything is tailored and based on customer requirement, and everything is made by hand, even today. Apart from just painting the chassis, everything is laid out. The leather is stitched by a person onto it, and it is exactly to the specifications that the client wants. And in fact, there is a specific person, the only one in the world, who can draw some trim lines on it using a squirrel brush or whatever. Even I don't understand that really well. But we live in a world where everything can be mass sourced, but to create something classic and something brilliant and iconic, you have to have great people. You need to have highly skilled people. Now, you look at our own network and your own network. What's different from your competitors? Well, you would say they've got a switch from Huawei and we've got one from Nokia or Ericsson. Big deal. And in roaming, we all have pretty much the same things, right? You would be using the same vendors for your steering tools. You would have the same STPs. There's nothing different. The only place you can make a difference is by the people that you have. And are your people skilled enough? Do they know how things have moved on? Are they there now to deal with these challenges that VoLTE roaming is bringing, that 5G will bring the massive challenge? Do they understand private networks? Do they understand neutral hosts? Do they understand how this all works together? How do you work with a satellite company? And this means that there's a lot of knowledge sharing which needs to happen. There's a lot of excellence that we need to build in our teams, expertise that we really need to build and understand this space better. So the only way for us to move forward, or for you to move forward, is to train your teams really, really well for this new world, which is very different from 2G GPRS and 3G days. So, I really encourage you to take this seriously. And we've seen this happen in the industry where people not anymore up to the date in what is going on. And hence, we'll be very happy to know, like I said, this is our birthday month in ROCCO. We've completed 11 years just this week. So in October, we're basically offering a special discount where you get access to all the ROCCO U courses, the whole subscription, for a massive 50% discount for 8 months. So you have to buy it in October, but you will have access to those courses for 8 months and you still get a 50% discount. And not only that, even on our research reports, because it's to celebrate the 11th anniversary, we're giving a 15% discount on all the research reports that we have published and will publish this year. So please do get in touch with us. If you want training, if you think your teams require training, they need more research material, they really need to understand what's going on, we have special discounts going on just for this month to celebrate our 11th anniversary. So I am pretty much at the end of today's course, which I think is 2 minutes early. So we have just enough time for if anybody has questions. Please feel free to use the chat function to ask me any questions. I do apologize. I do understand that I've been really, really quick and I've run through things very, very fast, but it's a lot of ground to cover and not enough time. But you can take the courses. Obviously, a lot of this material, most of this material is from the courses, so you can take the courses. Sorry, I'm a bit distracted by Chris's message. What is eSIM? I refuse to answer that because he's probably one of the experts on eSIM. He knows more about eSIM, I'm sure. But if you're really interested in eSIM, then do obviously look us up or write to me. I'll be more than happy to answer that question in detail. But for all those who've attended this session, thank you very much. Oh, I see. Sorry. Thank you, Chris, for specifying. What about eSIM? I mean, is it a threat or an opportunity? Again, I think it's a crisis-unity, like I mentioned earlier. It is definitely an opportunity for MNOs in general, where we can use eSIM for various purposes. It helps on the fraud side of things, helps on the logistics side of things. It helps customers get their phones more secure. It helps them move around, but it's also a risk where if we don't deal with this potentially well in terms of the commercial side of things, then it can really threaten roaming. And my fear is not that it provides. My fear is that it doesn't actually provide anything extra on top of what roaming provides in terms of experience. It is actually a worse experience because the customer has to take some steps to get an eSIM, where roaming should just work. The only advantage that an eSIM has today, and what they're trying to take advantage of, is offer better prices. So, and the way they're able to do that is just basically go around, get a domestic, sign a domestic contract through an MVNO type of deal with an MNO, and then use those prices to sell that connectivity to roaming customers. So in that sense, they seem to be offering something which is much cheaper, but actually, technically, it's not a better solution as such. They're just taking it's just arbitrage. And if operators don't learn to deal with this well and understand that, hey, it's still the same customer is coming on my network. Previously, he used to come as a roaming customer, and I would be able to charge him a premium for the roaming services. Now he's coming as a domestic kind of an MVNO customer, and I'm maybe making a tenth of what I used to make for it. So again, it's apologies. We can go on for a long time. I think it needs a better explanation, but I hope, Chris, I've kind of given my opinion on it in a few seconds. I'm also conscious we have 1 minute over the time of the webinar, but if you have any questions, please do get in touch with us. I'll take one last question from Jean-Marc. Is BCE mainly started to be used in MNO operators? Well, some operators have started, but it's still being standardized. GSMA still has to wait for release 2.0, which hopefully will come down maybe end of this year or early next year. And many operators are still waiting to see what that means, and then they will deploy it. So many operators have done it, but not as many as we would like to have seen. Sorry, I know it's not a real clear answer, but that's because the situation isn't really that clear. Most operators are still in a wait and watch position. Once again, thank you very much. Again, if you have any questions, please do write into us. If you missed part of the thing, we're doing the same session again tomorrow for a different, it's at tomorrow 10 a.m. CET. For those, if you join late, you can attend the session again tomorrow morning. Thank you once again, and I hope to see everybody soon. Thank you. Bye.